Jason Snell. I am an interdisciplinary artist. I've worked on music for, I got my first drum machine in '95 and messed around with Ableton for the last, let's say, 6 or 7 years. Stylistically, I started with hardcore. I did horror film scores for a little bit. Dark ambient, and then techno for a number of years, and then this project, which is called Primary Assembly, is based on technology I built, which takes the electricity from the brain and thoughts and converts it into MIDI. And so I can point that MIDI into Ableton, I can point it into a synthesizer or a drum machine. I'll explain some of the basics first, and then I'll perform, and then, any questions. When I do presentations like this, I learn as much as everyone else in the room, because when other people see it for their first time, the amount of ideas and questions that comes up is really engaging for me. Can you hear me okay? Should I get closer to the mic, or drag this over a little bit? How's that?
Yeah.
Great. Excuse me. This project began late 2017. I had a dream about, actually have the actual journal entry. It was a dream I had about making music with DNA sequences. And in the dream I was trying to impress a reviewer. I'd given them a demo and they didn't like the demo, and I was like, what could I do to make this demo more interesting to this reviewer? And the reviewer in the dream was a biologist, and so I walked away from getting rejected from this demo handoff. And I thought, I wonder if I could make music based on DNA or the body. And when I woke up, I wrote down right away, this is exactly what I wrote. And it says, what I can remember about the dream. I was at a mix between the NYU and Berkeley campus. I saw a woman who had given me some recent songs to, and the tracks I'd been making with a collab project with a friend of mine. I knew in the dream she was a New York Times reviewer and a biologist. I asked her what she thought of the music I gave her, and she replied, well, it's not really remarkable, is it? In a blunt sort of way. I felt hurt and didn't show it. I walked away from the building where I saw her through campus brainstorming how to make the music more interesting to her specifically. Then I wondered if there were patterns in human DNA that I could map into MIDI notes or rhythm patterns, and that would be a cool concept album. So that was December 3rd, 2017. So I woke up and I did a search, and right away I found on the NIH something that looked like, the MIDI window in Ableton. I was like, oh, this is great. And so I started screenshotting that and transposing it into Ableton and making patterns out of that and making rhythms and synthesizer patterns out of DNA, human DNA. And I created those in a traditional way using Ableton, using external hardware, and Ableton as the MIDI manager. And about a month and a half later, I was just on Instagram, on Inspirational, so the algorithms found me, and I saw an ad for the Muse headband, which is this device here. And the Muse is sold, the device is paired with a meditation app, and so the company sells this commercial EEG as a way to buy their app, and learn to meditate. The cool thing at the time was that Muse had an open API. Do you know what API is? Programming language. An API would be, it would allow me as a computer programmer to hack into the device and create my own app rather than using their app. And so I grabbed the API and started, or the SDK, the software development kit, and started developing my own app for it. Prior to this work, I had been working on a number of projects. The first one was I made an iOS app that was a music sequencer with an AI in it. And it started as a generative app where I could tap the screen a few times, and over time it would generate back random music. And over time I got it to learn the user taps, and it became an AI. It would learn the user and then generate music that sounded like that user. And so I had all these different frameworks, like a collection of computer code for MIDI, for bootstrapping an application, audio handling. And after I built the sequencer, my next project was working with a dancer in Berlin, where she was wearing motion sensors, and as she moved, I was converting her motion data into music. So I was converting motion into MIDI, and it could play a synthesizer or drum machine. And from there, for that project, I learned how to do Bluetooth communication between a custom iOS app and some sort of Bluetooth device, whether it's motion sensor or, once I got this EEG, it's Bluetooth. And so the signal path is, we've got the headband, which is here, and it's reading the electricity off of my brain through, it's actually 6 sensors, so it's across the forehead. And because it's 6 sensors, I can do spatial adjustments, so I can think left or think right. I've used that as a crossfader or to change the balance on a sound. That information, Bluetooth, is sent over Bluetooth into the app I made, which is a pretty utilitarian, very basic interface. What the app does is it runs all the different brainwaves coming through, and I'll show you the actual brainwaves. So brainwaves are broken down into delta is the lowest one, then you've got theta, alpha, beta, and gamma. And it's just like we saw earlier in terms of most of these are below the auditory level, but essentially this would be the bass, and then it gets higher pitched as the oscillators speed up. And what comes out of the brain into an EEG is a broadband signal of all these different brain waves at once. And the EEG system, what it does, it just uses high pass and low pass filters to create different bands. So you've got at the top the gamma band, and then the beta band, and then the alpha band. So it's just using the same tools that we use in audio production. So I've got these 5 different spectrums, frequency ranges, and each of them at any given point, based on what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, they're going to have different decibel levels within those ranges. So each range is going to have its own volume, and the behavior of these different waves is constantly changing moment to moment. So all that information is what's being sent over Bluetooth into my iOS app. And kind of an interesting thing that I learned recently about this. So this is the electromagnetic spectrum, and at the base we've got brain waves, which are almost a flat oscillation, 0.1, and a hertz is 1 oscillation per second, and it goes up to 44 hertz, which would be a real sub bass. Like audio, you can get down to 25, 20 hertz, and that's a real sub rumbly bass. And you've got the brain waves here. So as you move up the spectrum, you then get sound waves. And so anytime you're using something in Ableton, like a spectrum analyzer, it's going to be this range here, like 20 hertz up to about 20,000. And what's interesting is that brain waves are below it. It's the foundation of sound. So I can think a thought, and it's an octave. It's like a thought of mine could be like a C or a D sharp. And so that's part of the concept that goes into this, is that I'm taking the electricity and the oscillations of thought and converting it into sound. And then the next thing, which a friend told me in Berlin this fall, and it's one of those things where, like, there's my life before I learned this, and there's my life after I learned this. So on the same spectrum, I always thought it was a different spectrum, but on the same spectrum, so you've got brain waves, and as you get higher frequency, you have sound waves, and then you go up, 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 you get into radio waves, microwaves, infrared, and then you go all the way up into terahertz, and you get color. And so, like, the color green is a C note, just pitched up 40 octaves. And I always thought it was a different spectrum, but it's the exact same spectrum. And so in terms of everything we can see and everything we can hear, that's all the same spectrum, and brainwaves are the foundation of that spectrum. So conceptually, to be able to create with the very foundation of the electromagnetic spectrum, to create visuals and to create sound, that's as core as I can get, is getting to the actual foundational waves of essentially our experience in this reality. Any questions before I perform?
First of all, you're in like 2017, okay? Like, what's up? But like, I like, okay, so the C is like a color. So I don't know, I went into this, but in like the chakra way.
Yes.
How like the throat chakra, like the blue one, it's like an E, no, whatever is like
I think I do have them. Here they are.
Hey.
Yes, yes, the E is a violet.
But how does that go to like, how does that relate to that?
How does what relate to what?
like, does this relate to like this, like the chakra? I don't know. I'm just trying to understand.
I know. Yeah, that's how I felt when a friend first told me. I was like, wait, it's the same spectrum.
Yeah.
So you could take a color, the oscillation of a color, and pitch it down 40 octaves, and it would become a sound.
Okay.
I mean, so in some ways, it makes me think. Is that what people who have synesthesia experience, or see chakras or oars, is that what they're seeing? Or when people take a hallucinogen and start to see sound or hear color, you know, is their perceptual filter opening up where they can actually start to perceive other parts of the electromagnetic spectrum? Also, like cats, they're always looking at stuff we can't see. Like, I'm guessing they can see beyond
this, yeah.
I mean, that's a really limited spectrum that we can see, and so other creatures can see further out. Did they answer the question?
Kinda, but
okay.
Like, you know, my brain is still comprehending.
Yes.
Maybe this would shed light, but just like don't think about it too much. Just think of everything as a wave.
Yeah.
Everything's a wave.
Well, everything is like that,
sound,
yeah.
Just like, and then things will become a little bit simpler, but
Yeah.
it is fucking crazy.
Yeah. And everything's an oscillation, you know, like night and day. Just everything that we everything that we experience in this reality is just like the sine wave we saw earlier. Is, you know, there's this point and then this point and then it returns. And there's some variation of that, and that's what creates color, that's what creates vision, that's what creates sound. It gets really complex as you layer them up, but as you break it down, you get into pure oscillations. And yes?
Have you found a correlation between moods in thought and notes? Like you were saying, you thought something and it gives off a brainwave.
Mm-hmm.
So have you found a way to control what the outcome is?
Yeah, so the more I use this is essentially a new instrument, and so the more I use it, the better I get at controlling it. The EEG picks up electricity, but doesn't pick up chemicals, and the brain is electrochemical, so it's both electricity and powered by chemicals. And mood mostly comes from the chemical part of that. I can tell when I put it on if I'm really tired, the way it's gonna be less electricity coming out of my brain. There's some differences with sometimes gender, definitely with age. And so I had a friend who I went to test on her, and she had some little kids, and her little daughter put it on, who's I think 4, and the 4-year-old brain just doesn't produce as much electricity as the adult brain because it's a smaller organ. It doesn't have the capacity to output as much electricity, and so the waves were much smaller. And I put it back on an adult, and the dynamics were much more. So it's more about energy levels and shifting that. If I get into a sad mood, the energy goes down, but not necessarily a difference between like sad and variations of grief or tired necessarily. The electricity does change if I go from kind of a clear focus state to a meditative state, or different types of meditation. That changes the electricity, and that's something I can feel, and that's something I'm hearing consistently as I use the system.
What kind of sound output is it giving you? If you're like meditating, what are you hearing come out of the device?
Do you want me to demo it now?
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into it. So the MIDI is going into an Ableton patch, and there's different kits that I've created. So I've got a couple of different ones that I can use. This one is kind of a soundscape. It's called Soundscape, so that's the best way to describe it. All right, I'll get started. So in this visualizer, you'll be able to see my brainwave activity live. It usually takes about 10 seconds to get a good signal. Questions after you've seen it? Yeah. And that.
So what is going through your head as you're controlling it? Like what are you thinking like? Are you thinking like a specific control? Like I want to make this kick make this noise. What's the thought process as you're using the device?
The way I conceive of it, you know, when I go into it, the way I move around in the psychic space is it's almost like diving underwater or emerging from water. A lot of it's a different type of instrument. You know, when I first went into it, I was like, how do I play keys on it? You know,
right.
How do I play this or that? It'd be as if, let's say I played guitar all my life and then someone gave me a keyboard. I'd be like, well, how do I play this keyboard like a guitar? You know, I would bring my previous experience into it. And so initially when I started using this as a new instrument and started realizing it was a new instrument, I try to concentrate on how do I play individual notes as if I'm using my hands. What's different is it's the way I picture it. It's as I'm in a type of fluid, almost like in a sphere, and as I'm moving my body through that sphere, it creates ripples through the fluid I'm in, and those ripples are what hits the sounds or bounces off and creates the textures and the notes. Specifically, I'm looking at alpha waves, which were the blue waves on the screen, and then delta, which were the red. And delta is something that goes up typically when there's a stress response. So if someone were to say my name or tap me on the shoulder, or if there was a loud sound, my delta goes up. Alpha increases when I close my eyes and I go into a meditative state. And when the alpha overtakes the delta, I'm constantly looking at the relationship between those two. And that relationship, there's an algorithm that's constantly looking at those. That's what makes a lot of the decisions musically, texturally, in terms of density. So the more I can get into an alpha state, the music gets bassier. I'm using a low pass filter, taking out the highs and bringing it down, and then increasing some of the reverb and the effects, so it starts to get a dreamier, wider, deeper sound. And then if I start to wake up my brain or open my eyes or do an activating meditation or start to imagine moving things in my mind, so physical imagination, it starts to wake my brain up, and then the sound wakes up. And so there's a biofeedback that starts happening, particularly with longer sessions, where the thing that's creating the sound, which is my brain, is the same thing that's perceiving the sound. And when I can really get into it and lose all distraction, really focus on creation, perception, those two things start to get closer and closer, and a really powerful biofeedback starts to happen, where I've gotten into some really powerful ecstatic states, particularly in like hour-long performances, like 25 minutes in, just having a complete energetic and emotional upheaval from that biofeedback of the thing that's creating it is the thing that's perceiving it. So it's moving through different mental states.
So it's not like a specific thought you're having, it's more of like your overall thought patterns are influencing these different brain waves, and that's affecting the overall atmosphere.
Yeah, it's about changing electricity in a container, and that container is the brain. And the thing that controls the electricity in that container is the mind. And so sending intentions or movements into that changes the electrical patterns in the container, and then the EEG picks up that electrical activity and sends it along.
Cool, thanks for the explanation.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's describing a brand new instrument, so let's go way in the back.
Okay, so if you weren't to focus on what's going on in your head and kind of were just thinking as you usually do,
Sure.
what would it sound like?
It would be, sound would come out because the electricity is coming out. There's been times where I've put it on and answered emails or been on the phone or just done mundane tasks. So the notes will pitter along. The joy from it is learning to control it and steering it and changing it, particularly over time, and creating a narrative with it. But yeah, anytime, I mean, actually I was testing the system earlier and I took a nap with it on and listened to my brain as I fell asleep. So it keeps going, just the notes it hits, the instruments it chooses, the density, all that changes based on the mental state. Yeah, standing up.
I would imagine that meditation is probably like your best, tool as far as like learning how to control this thing, right? If so, how long have you been meditating for? Would you say that you're able to reach a state of like total mindfulness, as in like able to clear your mind of all distraction, and for how long are you able to maintain that? And could you elaborate at least a little bit on that?
Sure. Yeah, I started meditating when I was 19, and I've learned all sorts of techniques over the years, and using this system allows me to move into different techniques, and that allows me to manipulate the sound more accurately. There was a number of questions I want to make sure what were the other ones? How long have I meditated?
yeah, like, are you able to get into a state at this point
Yeah,
where you're able to be totally undistracted and totally?
Yeah, it changes from scenario to scenario. So that was one of my concerns when I first started doing this project early last year, 2019, was it's different building and testing it in my studio and then going into a performance situation. My brain is going to be behaving much differently. And that's also the goal of the project. I've done techno also since I was about 19. And the thing that I didn't like about techno is whether I was nervous or excited or happy or bored or whatever, the music sounds the same. Because as long as I turn the knobs and do the sliders and hit the pads or whatever it is in that moment, my actual mental state isn't coming through the music. Whereas this, it is. Like how I'm feeling is instantly conveyed. And it brings... the goal of a lot of this work is bringing myself and the audience to that same moment of when the music's created, rather than making something, polishing it, and then playing it, something I'm familiar with, but it's new to all of you. When I perform with this, I know some of the sounds, but the composition is as new to me as it is to everyone else. And then the next phase of this will be actually shaping and synthesizing the sounds with my mind as well. So everything is new that's coming out. So we all start experiencing music in the exact same moment. And did I catch all the meditation?
Pretty much.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Steve.
So you said that your app used an AI to learn like users' patterns
Yeah.
that's trained on your patterns.
So that was a previous app. So the EEG system doesn't use the AI or the generative patterns. But that's a good question. Next one.
So I guess you're doing control signals, but also generating the notes.
Yep, so MIDI-wise, it's sending MIDI no on and off signals, and then different CC mappings, which I can show you, which is why we've got this switcher. And I can show you the mappings.
I guess like the control signals are pretty straightforward, but note on and off are like discrete events. So I'm wondering do you have like a threshold that it crosses that you determine, or how does that work?
Is that showing you? No, that's not. Let me know if it pops up. Cool. I will explain the CCs first, but I will answer the note. With this particular, so I can map the CCs or have it output whatever CCs, so it is a range. As these waves are going up and down, they can control different. And with this, it's effects and filters. I don't know if volumes are on here. No, it's mostly frequencies and filters. With the notes, what happens is there's different threshold points as waves cross. So in a way, it's a keyboard metaphor. As waves are hitting different value levels, when it's also looking at other waves, so a lot of the algorithms are relational. It's not a direct relationship, this wave to this sound. But when certain conditions are met and certain waves dive down through the decibel levels or go up, it hits different triggers. And so when I'm getting into a subconscious or a meditative state, which is alpha, as the alpha is crossing certain thresholds, a mild meditation will be hitting kick sounds. But if I get down to a deeper relaxed state, it'll start hitting the sub sounds. So I've made creative choices where the sounds that are coming out match the feeling I'm feeling, and that's where the biofeedback reinforcement happens as well. So if I'm hearing what I'm feeling, it allows me to go deeper and deeper into that. And in terms of meditation, the previous question, normally when I meditate, I can do an active meditation to go up a little bit, or relaxing, or inner meditation to go down a little bit, but there's a limited range I've got. With this system, if I drop down and then start to hear those sounds, I then can ladder even further and further down, or higher and higher up. And those are some of the things that happen after performing for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, really getting into those really deep meditative states, because this system is allowing me to ladder up and ladder down because of that reinforcement, the biofeedback reinforcement.
And those rules, are those set in place when you start the performance, or do they sort of respond to where you're hovering around and it's rescaling itself as you go along?
There's some rescaling, but a lot of the thresholds are marked not at a specific frequency level, but at a percentage level. So the percentage part is the scaling part, but which percentage those thresholds are at are fixed. So the answer is kind of both.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And one more question.
Sure, well, you got it.
Have you noticed that anything in your day-to-day life that you can attribute to sort of like whatever it is you are training as you focus, like that's different now than when you like first put on the headband?
Like, can I see the Matrix, that type of thing? The answer is yes, I totally can. What changes have happened? The electromagnetic spectrum thing really changed things for me. In terms of using the system, usually I feel the most impact right after performing. It feels like my sphere of feeling or intuition expands quite a bit, and it feels like I could just weave through a crowd super easily. I can just feel presences more and feel those, because that's the space I go into. It feels like it's a sphere and I'm moving in that sphere, and if there's other energies in it, I can feel it press against it and I can navigate around it. And that's usually immediately after a performance.
Isn't that terrifying?
I haven't really done it much in Manhattan yet, so we will see. But I have been at a crowded festival afterwards.
It's probably really draining though, like around all these people, and then you can feel everything, like, oh my god.
It's not necessarily I'm absorbing it, but I'm feeling it's not getting in through the boundary, but it's hitting up against it. But yeah, I see what you're saying, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, have you like tried, instead of like sounds, like changing patches, like for instance playing guitar while using it to change patches off of a pedal board of sorts?
One of the projects I want to do, instead of mapping sounds, is mapping consonants and vowels and pieces of the English language and seeing what words I can assemble. For this project, this has always been the primary thing. I haven't used it as an auxiliary control. I know other EEG artists have, so someone could be performing while their brain controls the lights. For this, I want to be completely focused on the output of my brain going to a type of visual you can see and hear without any other device. The other thing that's interesting about the brain as opposed to hands is, if I'm performing a traditional techno set, I can only really change 2 parameters at once with my hands, because I have to move around. But with my brain, there's 5 waves, but there's also relationships between the waves, and so all these different parameters are changing simultaneously based on just one change of energy or a shift in consciousness. All these things can transform. So for me, as an instrument, as a performance tool, there's a lot more versatility.
This is Black Mirror.
Yeah, it is Black Mirror. Second round.
2 questions. One
Yes, please.
is it available publicly if we had our own muse to hook up?
This app is not, no. So right now, there's so much change happening. So I'm in a research and development phase where almost every time I perform, it's a new iteration of it.
Okay.
Once it stabilizes, then I'll figure out how to make it more available.
All right. And the second question is, have you considered respiration and heart rate variability specifically as potential other biometrics that could influence the soundscape?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So I do have a version where I'm wearing an Apple Watch and it's grabbing my heart rate, and then that's setting the tempo directly. With this system, the tempo is being set by my overall brain activity or calmness. Breath rate, there is a newer version of the Muse that also picks up on breath rate, but they pulled the SDK for it. So I was lucky that I even have access to the SDK that I've got, that I can hack into this older version. They keep saying they plan to release that, but it's been maybe a year and a half now and they haven't. So I haven't been able to access the breath data from the Muse, and I I don't know what other sort of, maybe you know some, I could talk to you afterwards, sensors to pick up on breath.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, purple.
Just to bring it back to the Ableton
Yes.
thing, I'm pretty new with Ableton, but I'm assuming you're using the band as a MIDI controller, and then you're setting each of those columns to be, each wavelength goes to one of them. How are you using Ableton in this?
Yep. So Ableton, we've got the MIDI mappings on the left here, and I've programmed the app to output certain control changes, which would be the equivalent of, you know, the keyboard that was up here earlier, and then he mapped something by turning a knob. Different brain activity turns different knobs. So instead of using a MIDI controller, I'm using my brain. And then I map them to these specific, on this sound kit, I've mapped it to these specific parameters. Yes?
Do you have other kits that you prepared? Could you just do a similar performance but with completely different soundscape?
Yep, absolutely. So I actually loaded another one here. I can do, I want to be conscious of time, so I could either do kind of a distorted aggressive one or like a dreamy IDM one. Should we take a vote? All right, I think we've got a consensus. I guess it is New York. Turn off the MIDI mapping. All right, let's see what comes out. And I'll be available for questions afterwards for as long as you want. I just want to be conscious of the time of the meetup. Any last questions before we go? Yes?
What was happening when there were those long pauses? What was happening in your brain? Or how do you explain those?
So sometimes when it's this particular mapping, and sometimes there's spaces in the mapping. With this particular mapping, when I'm taking a large breath in, my gamma and beta go up, and this is mostly using alpha and delta. And what happens is that there's a breath in, there's a space, and then it's almost like pushing water out, and then when it comes back in, that's when the notes are being hit. So that's this specific mapping. And again, the mapping has changed each time I've performed, so I'm always tweaking it and changing it. Another thing which is effective to drop all the levels, when you see all the levels go down, is if I look at a screen, all my brainwaves drop, which is a little creepy. If you're into transhumanism, one of my...
What's transhumanism?
Transhumanism is it's a philosophy where transhumanists believe that technology will improve the quality of life for humanity, and then also eventually have us evolve into a new species, cyborg-esque. I'm not necessarily a proponent of it. I think technology is too dangerous. But one of the things in terms of transhumanism is this idea of shifting consciousness eventually into a machine. So when your body dies, your soul still exists, or your consciousness still exists. It is. And so when you look at a screen, or when I look at a screen, I'm assuming this is universal, I've tested with this other people, the brainwaves drop because I think the consciousness is going into the device. So when I'm looking at a feed, I'm not in my body anymore. I'm where the content is, whether I'm talking to a friend or looking at Instagram or whatever it is. So that's my theory, is the consciousness is shifting into the device. It's something I use as a tool to manipulate the electricity in my brain, but that's kind of an aside.
Are you okay? Do you need a hug?
Yeah.
This sounds very terrifying. It sounds like a horror movie.
Hugs welcomed. Yes.
I was gonna say, I feel like for like film composers, and this would be like a really amazing device to use.
Yep.
Like, especially when you're watching a film, you go through all these different waves of emotions and like brain activity. I feel like.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know.
I thought exactly that. Yeah, because it's a very, it's not music that is linked necessarily to a time code or a tempo or quantization.
Yeah.
The phrase that's come up as I've studied more into this is biomorphic. It's the shape of, it's a very human composition, and a lot of film is very shaped by human emotion. As someone who used to work on film scores, it's not necessarily a steady beat, it's whatever the director and the visuals have created, the music usually wraps around that.
Around that.
Yeah, so that's almost like a cinemorphic, whereas what's coming off of the EEG is biomorphic. It's the shape of my, the electricity in my body in that given moment. Yes, lecture?
I have a two-part question.
Yes.
I'm going to answer the first. Are you able to manipulate the hertz that you're working in with this type of program?
In terms of, can I...
Spectrum, from the base of the alpha all the way, the delta all the way up to the gamma as far as the hertz is concerned. Are you able to manipulate that at all?
With my brain or with the application?
Either way.
I can't control where the frequency cutoffs are, but through different brain techniques, I can control the decibel level in those different ranges. So things that are in the delta, I can increase the activity there.
Okay. Upward?
Yeah, all the way up to gamma. I'm learning, every time I use it, I'm learning more and more ways to control the decibel level at those different frequencies. But I can't control the actual where the cutoffs are.
Oh, okay.
And,
Yeah, because 432 is supposed to be our natural hertz, but now we're working in 440.
Oh, interesting.
Which makes us more anxious.
Yeah.
So, I was wanting to know if that could be manipulated and go back to the 432, which is the natural harmony.
What could be done is the thing that's creating the output, whether it's a synthesizer or Ableton, whatever's producing it, could be set at that, and then I've done this a type of performance where I just take the brain waves, instead of doing composition, I just move it up a few octaves. And so if there was some sort of biofeedback that happened at the frequency I wanted, once I get that, I start getting that positive loop, and that will then train the brain wave that's a few octaves below it to resonate, you know, at that same harmony. Yep. Well, again, I want to be conscious of everyone's time. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and I want to thank the